following program on Other Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations.
Tonight, we discuss the intricacies of parliamentary elections and its legal framework. What processes apply for when there is no clear majority, and how can we expect the law to make just this process? A very good evening, and thank you for taking the time to join us on yet another episode of Law, Land and Liberty, where we bring to you key legal concepts and break it down for the layman. Now, tonight's topic is something that concerns you and I, and also the rest of the nation tonight, and that's the parliamentary elections. Of course, with the way things are headed, we're not exactly sure what the political future of Sri Lanka is looking like at the moment, and it's very important for us to get some legal insight and some consensus into exactly how the legal happenings occur around this entire diplomatic process, the democratic process. And to talk about this very intricate subject, we have with us someone that is, I believe, very well suited for this discussion, and that is Counsel Chrishmal Warnasuriya. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us tonight and educate our viewers on this topic.
Thanks, Anuradhi. Thank you for having me.
And before we get into any of the specifics on the discussion, here's a little bit of an introduction. Mr. Chrishmal Warnasuriya is a counsel in Sri Lanka and the UK, and specifically he is the only Sri Lankan to be representing the country, Sri Lanka, at the ICC at The Hague. So safe to say he has a lot of legal insight when it comes to democratic processes as well. Before we get into the topic, here's how we're going to approach it tonight. First, we'll be talking about the very basics and the fundamentals of the parliamentary elections and what laws surround it and how it's enshrined in the Constitution. Next, we'll be talking about the current context with recent changes that we have seen and also the concerns moving ahead. And finally, we'll be talking about the future of Sri Lanka following parliamentary elections.
Hello, my name is Anjali Namodya and I'm currently studying in the final level of Aquinas Diploma in English. And my question is on the fundamentals: what legislature governs parliamentary elections?
All right, well, without any further ado, let's get right into the most essential bits of this conversation. Once again, sir, thank you very much. And thank you once again for taking the time to actually break down this concept, because we've seen a lot of conjecture, we've seen a lot of conversation, but not a lot of clarification when it comes to the process that lies ahead. So I think it's best for us to start with the basics, which is the legal framework. If you could explain to us, sir, about parliamentary elections and what laws actually govern that entire area.
Yeah. Thanks, Anuradhi, for inviting me and Derana. With your permission, if I may, in our discussion, I was just thinking about this on our way here. The short answer to your question is Parliamentary Elections Act and the Constitution, Articles 3 and 4, sovereignty. But all our discussions, with your permission, I'd like to focus on not what the law or the loopholes in the law are now, but what it ought to be for you, for your future, your generation, when, like us, you become a senior lawyer, a young law student like you see the world you're going to be facing, the parliaments that your generation is going to be facing, is going to have far more complicated issues. So whatever law that we discussed, I'll take you through it. I'd like to approach it from that angle as to what it ought to be rather than what it is and the problems we're having now. So a very quick answer to your question, Anuradhi, is that whilst the present Constitution, Articles 3 and 4, and legislation formulated thereunder, like the Parliamentary Elections Act, govern specific provisions, parliamentary or democracy or rule by several segments of our country is not something that is after our constitutional process. This has been throughout our history. If you look at the Mahavansa, from the days of King Pandukabha around 465 BC, and then coming to the great King Parakrambahu I, we have had devolved government in senses within Sri Lanka, which is why before I get to Article 3 and 4 sovereignty, as a young law student, perhaps you would permit me, I don't know whether you had a chance to look at Article 172 of our Second Republican Constitution, which is the last provision of the Constitution. This brings us to the grounds on which our laws must operate. So Article 172, after saying everything, all the laws that we're going to be talking about, says how the country must be governed. Devo vasatu kalena, sassa sampatti bodcha, picho bhavatu lokocha, raja bhavatu dhammiko. What does that say? That for a country to be successful, for the people to be happy, excuse me, the country must be run by the Dhamma in a strict sense of the word, but if we interpolate it to our present provisions, the Constitution. This is the rule that must govern the country. So the elaborated answer to your question as to what would govern sovereignty and parliamentary democracy are the Constitution, Articles 3, sovereign power, which is vested absolutely in a citizen, which is inalienable, and then Article 4, which separates it into three organs of government: the legislature that we are speaking of now, and the judicial arm of government that I belong to, that hopefully you will be belonging to very soon, and then the executive arm of government, the president and the cabinet. We can discuss these later. So the electoral process is for the legislative power of the people, and Articles 4E, particularly in the Constitution, refers to franchise as a right, an inalienable right of a citizen, the right to franchise. And you may know earlier in our devolution, we didn't have a complete franchise. It was limited to those with education or those with money and those with property, but it was after a certain period of evolution that we got universal adult suffrage. So that's where we are coming from. So what governs the parliamentary process is Article 3, sovereignty, the separation of it into Article 4, and franchise and the Parliamentary Elections Act.
So the very basics is what we just touched on as well.
Very basic.
Yes, exactly. There's quite a bit of intricacies that we can get into, but I believe that would turn discussion slightly convoluted. But we can, of course, as you mentioned, approach it step by step, especially when it comes to this entire democracy that we have in the country, when it comes to proportional representation as well. If you could walk us through this, sir, especially when it comes to how it's defined in the Constitution and also in the Parliamentary Act, what seats are allocated to where, and how exactly we see an adequate representation of the entire populace in one institution?
Okay. So the proportionate representation that we speak of now cannot be explained without a relative or comparison to what is very widely commonly known as a first past the post system, or a majoritarianism system, where it's very simple. If two people are competing, you and I gain the higher majority, I get elected. Now this may be very nice in a place or electorate where only two people run. But over time, they found that this is not adequate. For example, in our 1960s and 1970s elections, they found that when you put the total amount of what the opposition parties gained, although the party that won that particular electorate have won it because they, compared to just one party, have got more, when you collect the total number of oppositions, they've actually got more than this party. So particularly in that circumstance, they found that we should go for a better system. So the proportionate representation system is an answer that came to alleviate. That's not the only ailment, so such as minority protection, areas where there may be a majority in an electorate, but the minority also must have a voice. These are some of the things that the proportionate representation system sought to cure. So the proportionate representation system permits citizens of an electorate to cast their vote not just for the party, thereby, as I said earlier, say A and B runs and then A gets more, he gets elected. But in this instance, some people have said even if you lose, you win. Why? Even if a party loses in the overall district, in some electorates they may have won because of a proportionate representation system. So even if they had lost even that electorate, by a ratio. So there is a calculation. I won't complicate it too much. In terms of a constitution, we have amended our provisions over time, articles 90 odd if I remember, to give way to this proportional representation system and the Manapa system, which we can also discuss, where the people are allowed to elect more than one person, which is called the Manapa or the preferential vote system, which is a further advancement of the proportional representation system. So basically in the order of the proportion of votes that you get, there is a cutoff, and those above that cutoff will get seats in the parliament according to the proportion that they garnered. That's a basic example of proportional representation. It's more complicated in working, but that's a basic example, a basic explanation of it.
Right. So we have seen an evolution when it comes to exactly how we are best represented. Personal opinions, in your opinion, does this proportional representation system effectively garner a voice to all citizens, or do we see serious lapses?
Having been in this game for a while now, Anuradhi, I think it's yes and no answer. I'm sorry. See, yes, it alleviates a lot of the problems that I referred to earlier. It permits areas where there are majoritarian rules, even for minorities to have a voice. I don't mean minorities only in the sense of a racial minority, but it can be even an electoral minority. Or say, for example, let me take England for example, say the Greens, who are relatively low in number when compared to the entire country. But they can also have a voice. Those who believe green, who want to live green, can also have the representation in parliament. But in Sri Lanka, what I've noticed is the deviation from our earlier system to our present proportional representation converted to the Manapa convolution. What I see is now we've lost a member of parliament answerable to an electorate. So, for example, the electorate of Moratuwa that I was representing at the last election and even before. See, because although I contest from the electorate of Moratuwa and I'm given an organizership to organize Moratuwa, not at this election, I have nothing to do with it, but because I have to contest all over the district of Colombo, I don't really have to go to Moratuwa or stay there. I can still get my vote from Kolonnawa, Kasbah, Havisala, whatever, and I still go into parliament. Then the poor chaps in Moratuwa will wonder, I say, where is our MP? MP has gone. So that is a problem that we have to find within this system, where you have someone answerable to an electorate, although they are running the whole district as a campaign.
Right. Well, I think that means that we have some work to do when it comes to the streamlining process as well. But of course, that will be seen in the years to come if there are changes that are developed and adopted. I think it's important for us to get into the current context as well. Now, recently, we've seen a lot of talk about the parliamentary elections and a lot of changes that we saw suggested in public forums as well. When it comes to the actual changes that were done recently, could you please alert us on any effects that it could have on the upcoming elections?
There are several changes to legislation itself, Anurag. I think the most important one, in my opinion, is this Expenditure on Election Campaigning Act 23, what is it, Act number 3 of 2023. Brought it, if we can refer to some provisions if we have time. But before that, may I just say, before going to the legislation, we must look at some of the recent Supreme Court judgments. Because you see, Article 3 and 4, sovereignty and its extension in Article 4, have been interpreted by the Supreme Court in several judgments recently. For example, if you look at that last judgment or very recent judgment where the Supreme Court found that the previous government have mismanaged the economy and found several people accountable for it. Even the recent judgment where His Excellency the President, acting in his capacity as Finance Minister, President Wickremesinghe, was found to have violated fundamental rights. Now, those I think are also important when you think of recent developments in the law, because as you know, as a young law student, law is not only made in books, law is also made by judges and people like us going to court, hopefully you in a few years, arguing cases and making law. So those also are important because that has a ramification in how an electoral process runs. Because now people are going to be scared. Because I must congratulate the judicial arm of government, not because we belong to it, but because compared to the other two organs of government on which people appear to have lost faith to an extent, which is manifested by the recent Aragale and then the recent election result, where people's anger manifested into a complete change from one man who got 300,000 into almost a 200% increase, which no one thought is mathematically possible. But I would say that those decisions upon government are also important recent developments in the law that you speak of, but particularly with regard to this Regulation on Election Expenditure Act, Anuradi, if I can quickly go through some provisions. So Section 2, it regulates all elections, so local authority, provincial, general and presidential. Then Section 3 imposes ceiling on what candidates or parties can spend on stations such as your station and other stations and campaign advertising. It imposes a ceiling. How it works is they break it down into a proportion and they say per person you can only spend this much. And then Section 5, there's a restriction on gifts, donations and all of that. Under that, a report must be submitted within a given deadline. And then Section 7 makes it very important that those reports submitted are transparent, they're open to the public. And Sections 4, 5, 8 have offences. If you violate those campaign finance regulations, you are held penally liable. So that is, I think, one of the recent most important developments in written law that has come about with regard to running an election, because everyone now running for the election soon will have to be guided by it.
Exactly. We do have to talk about now just the fact that there were multiple changes brought in, and you just explained to us just a few of what changes we saw. We have to talk about the effect that it would have moving forward as well. But before we get into any of those specifics and also future implications, let's take a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Derana and I am a businessman. My question is on the current context. What mechanisms are in place to ensure proportional representation and primacy of Parliament?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We're in conversation with Counsel Chrishmal Warnasuriya. So we were just getting into the very basics, the foundational ideas of proportional representation and also parliamentary elections in its outright. And we were talking about recent developments as well. I think if we could further that discussion a little bit more and talk about these recent changes and how we will expect it to impact the upcoming elections as well. If we could have a little bit more focus on the legislative aspect, and just as we just mentioned how the courts are involved, how pieces of legislature are going to shape the future of our elections.
Okay. So you have, under the Parliamentary Elections Act, which I referred to as we started, you have several offences. I think they are more or less, Anuradi, now covered, such as personation, offences such as bribery, gratification. I mean, I have seen the recent Elections Commission taking mammoth steps in curtailing and ensuring a free and fair election. I must say, I must congratulate all governments over the past 5 to 7 to 10 odd years. Overall, there have been fairly decent elections held, and there hasn't been any room for complaint other than a few sporadic incidents here and there. So, for example, we had the former Mako, not the present man, the former man, a very charismatic man, saying, if you remember, when he was asked if the police are to shoot some fellow below the leg if they come to violate in election laws, they said, shoot in the head. He said. So the electoral laws overall, I think, have been in action. Also, people being compelled to bring the identity cards, them having to bring their polling cards and show that they are the person that they claim to be. So those things, I think, have been fairly covered, and we are also, as a nation, I think we are going beyond YM elections. When I was a youngster, where, you know, there's mass rigging and ballot box rigging and all that, I don't think we are having that anymore. Also, computers, electronics, media, a presence there, monitors, that has brought about massive changes in our electoral process. But if you particularly look at the recent legislation that I just discussed, see how this will work, Anurad, is this. So, if you remember earlier, there was this earlier saying no to go to Parliament. Now, I was told, luckily I am not running this time, I was told that, in Sinhala I was told, Koti Panak, Ate Tiyaganna, Kolamba contest karan. That is what? 500 lakhs. And the question was asked, hello, if an MP only gets about 50,000 rupees every month, how is he going to come and spend 500 lakhs to run an election, and how is he going to earn this back? And that made way for illegal gratifications or little santosams given once you're elected, particularly if you're in government. You know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Now, but why was all that money needed? Once again, it comes to campaigning, advertising. You know, those little strips that go under when somebody talking, or maybe you'll play that also in our program. But, you know, they cost money. For you to come out with children and, you know, songs in the background, that costs money. So all that is now restricted under this expenditure, because all the parties get together and the Elections Commission imposes a ceiling, and you can't go above that ceiling, and you have to give a report. So that, I think, in the presidential election also, to a large extent, but of course I heard that only 4 parties had given their reports and the others have not. So that's something that the Elections Commission must look at. But I think this law is very, very healthy, because seriously, Anurad, being a lawyer, you have practiced law for 25 years, not just here and overseas. I don't have that budget. I don't have 1/100th of that budget. So thankfully, I'm not contesting this election. But, you know, so otherwise what happened is people with money or people with power or people who have gained illegal gains would go into Parliament. But now this, I think, is a very healthy development, Anurad.
Right. So we're seeing a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay. Then that's I guess that is to be looked forward for. Maybe with future reforms, we'll see an even more refined process when it comes to keeping parties and individuals accountable in order to be elected in a democratic process.
But now here's a good test for the Elections Commission. See, the recent presidential election, it was published by all the media channels that only 4 parties have given their report. Now this will be a good test. By 2023, this legislation comes out. This is the time, 2024, it's being tested. Now the Elections Commission can show that they can actually have teeth. Go after those people who have not given the reports, because that will enforce confidence in us as voters. Say, okay, the law is being, see, all these days, we had laws, but they were being flouted. So now let the Elections Commission show, no, we got a legislation, we are going to enforce it.
Exactly. The enforcement aspect is what is necessary here. We're already seeing enough pieces of paper that have been coming in and being given power. So we have to look forward for that as a people.
May I just take 30 seconds on the enforcement? Enforcement, Anuradhi, is not just media shows. Not going to golfers and showing vehicles and all that and saying this is enforcement. Enforcement is actually, now you said you came to, that's the common slogan, no? Not legislation, not constitutionalism. Horwalana. Now catch the rogues. That's what you have been given power. That's what the people agitated. That's what the people gave this massive, of course not a clear majority, something less than 50%, but still His Excellency Amrut Sanak had been elected by the people to catch these robbers. Now you must show that. Other than getting one of your chums to go and show vehicles at golf fairs, you need to show that I'm actually doing the job.
Exactly. There has to be actionable results when it comes to democracy in the country. I think it's important for us to get into what I believe a lot of people are expecting to discuss in the next few weeks ahead leading up to the election as well, and that's on hung parliaments. Well, this is a very convoluted topic. because we're not exactly sure, it's not like we can predict the future, but we are expecting quite a bit of tumultuous electioning coming forward. If you could explain to us, sir, in the aspect of a hung parliament, what exactly is the law that governs who gets power? How is it even an effective parliament at that point?
So the concept of a hung parliament, for the benefit of your viewers who may not understand from a constitutional point of view what it is where one party does not garner a clear majority to form a government. So for this we must visit some constitutional provisions which deal with what government is. So at the moment we have 225 members of parliament, 29 coming from the national list and the others directly elected. So you need 113 to be a majority in parliament. Without a majority, you won't be able to get anything done, anything passed and all of that. Now, when we say hung parliament is when you don't get that majority. Now, as much as I wish His Excellency the President and his party all the very best, I don't foresee, I may have to live to regret these words later, but from the voting and the teams that are being put forward, I really don't see any party getting such a clear majority. That will lead to coalition. So one answer to your question, Anuradha, is if you have a hung parliament or a parliament where a majority, a clear majority is not prevalent, the answer would be to go for a co-aligned government. So you will ask other parties, and that is provided for in our constitution. So very quickly, Article 42 of our constitution deals with a cabinet of ministers, and in terms of our constitution, Article 42 cabinet is government. So it is a cabinet of ministers that are vested with the authority and power to govern, to run government. That's so government is a cabinet. Cabinet involves a president who is directly elected, which we did a few weeks ago, and very funnily in our country, Anuradha, we pick our executive branch through our legislative branch. This I have been shouting for years now, saying we have a convoluted system because now we claim to have, I'm sorry, at the cost of digressing, I'll take 2 seconds to explain this. We claim to have followed an American model and a French model and brought an executive presidential system. But in America, the president does not sit in the Congress. Neither do his ministers sit in Congress. He and his secretaries meet outside of Congress, the Senate. Similarly, in France, there is an executive president. He and his conseil or his council ministers do not come to the houses of parliament. In our country, we have tried to hybrid these two as usual. Sri Lanka tried to be everything in one, all in one. That's how we like it, no 3 in 1, 2 in 1. So we have now asked the president, who is directly elected, to take his cabinet from the legislature. Now what happens? This leads to a lot of corruption because the president can then promise certain perks like a ministership and say, I say, will you come? I'll give you this. So you vote for party A and say, Chrishmal Warnasuriya to go to parliament to represent your view. I go in there, president waves a carrot at me, I say, bye Anuradhi, I'm going to that side. So that leads to a lot of problems. So we have to find a solution. So that one answer to your hung parliament is where they will have to make a co-aligned government. Now we can discuss what will happen if such a government fails, but so one answer to that is if you don't get a clear majority, the only answer would be for you to form a co-aligned government.
Exactly. So is the co-aligned government the only solution that we have seen? Are there any other avenues that are to be followed that we may have not even considered prior?
Well, if the present or the last honourable opposition leader, Mr. Premadasa, garners a majority, or at least somewhat close to a clear majority, he may very well ask His Excellency Disanayaka whether, I mean, he doesn't have to ask, His Excellency President Disanayaka must appoint, in his opinion, who garners a majority view in Parliament as a Prime Minister. Now, a Prime Minister again is not a primus inter pares like a traditional Westminster system. A Prime Minister is also another minister in our system. Although he is called Prime, there is no Prime. He is just Minister, because the President is the head of the Cabinet. Now, they may form a government together. That Anuradha is provided for in the form of a national government. So Article 46(4) of our Constitution, Article 46(4) says, so after setting out Article 42, how the President will appoint his ministers, how he will allocate subjects, all of that, Then it goes on to say, notwithstanding anything there on how ministers, state ministers are all appointed, and there's a cap on the number, notwithstanding anything on that, if the party that gets the highest number of seats in parliament wishes to form a national government, in the parliament, they have left provision for that. If you know, there were some national governments even previous, even the Yapana government and some government that came after, they formed a national government where parties got together to form a government. So that's also another option that's available.
Right. And in your opinion, when it comes to the formation of national governments and also coalitions, how does that reflect on the power that the president holds in his position?
If they work together, I think, in my opinion, having been around for a while, 2002 to 2004, the government where Her Excellency Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga was president, but his Honorable Mr. Wickramasinghe was head of government, Prime Minister. We got a lot of healthy things done in the country at that time. Why? Because one balance checked the other. So this absolute power given to an executive president was checked by a government made up of another party. That is very healthy. Now, someone out there is going to come out to me with the argument, although you may not be able to talk to me, say, what happened in 2015 then? What happened in Japan? Japan, what happened was, we had Raikomya Gampalaya. We had one man, born and bred in Colombo, gone to Royal College, speaking English and thinking in Colombo 7. And we had the president, to a complete opposite, who had come from a very rural area, and they could not meet on anything. So, every decision they took, there were two decisions. They were pulling at each other. So we didn't have a healthy government. Now, if you can get over that, if His Excellency President Dissanayake now, and if the Honourable Opposition Leader or someone else who garners a majority in Parliament can get over the personality clashes and think of the country, think how can we, because Anuradhi, our country is tethering on the edge of a precipice. We have elections, we are spending money, we don't know how we are going to feed our nation in a few months. There is a UN Human Rights Council coming up in March. We are going to face a lot of, you need a lot of smart brains, good brains in all aspects in this parliament, and also not just Poteguras. People may have written books and read books and become professors and doctors, but without any practical experience of having approached problems, they'll be limited to the book. As we saw at the last election, some of the debates I also went to in support of one of the candidates, I saw when they were asked questions, they got stuck. So we need a lot of hands-on good people in a government, and if they can work together, as I said, to put their personalities aside, work together, then it's workable.
Exactly. So that depends on exactly how cohesive the parties could be, and that will directly reflect on the functioning of the country for the next few years as well. We do have to get into the specifics about integrity and also a genuine problem in Sri Lanka when it comes to the pure process, the unadulterated process of democracy. Before we get into any of such specifics, let's take a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We'll be right back with the final segment.
Of University of Sri Lanka. My question is on the future. How can we expect legislature and practices relating to the parliamentary process to change over time?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We're in our final segment now in conversation with Counsel Chrishmal Warnasuriya. So thank you very much for the previous two segments. We covered a lot of ground. I think before we went into the break, I mentioned that we have to talk about the integrity of this entire process. But before we do get into some controversial specifics, I think it's important for us to that map out and actually explain to the viewers about what role the MP would actually play and what rules they will have to abide by in order to ensure that they are doing their intended purpose. If you could walk us through that, sir.
Yeah. Now you will have to, your viewers will have to excuse my subjective approach to this because I am also a political animal from an Aristotelian point of view. I think being an MP, you actually come to be of service. I am against these honorable things, honorable so-and-so, Garu so-and-so, because you are not doing an honorary service. You are getting paid for it. Our direct democracy from old Athens, Sparta, Greece have converted to a representative democracy where we give so many benefits to a member of parliament to go in there and work. So you need to work. So whilst in law you're subjected to the oath of office that all organs of government take, whether we are as lawyers in the judicial arm, the members of parliament, and so when you're a member of parliament, you take the same oath of office, you say, to abide by the constitution, to protect it, not to espouse the creation of all that, the fourth schedule oath. Now, you can't be only stuck to that oath, because you, starting from King Derana Piyatissa downwards in our history, as I go back to history because our country is so rich in our history, we are given public office in a position of trust. It's called the concept of public trust. Our Supreme Court, as you know, the young law student, has evolved this over the years and fine-tuned it and very zealously guarded this concept. No one is an absolute repository of the power. The repository is in the people. So as I said earlier, I am not contesting this particular election for my own reasons, but if you are coming into, if I were asked to come to some position to serve the country, that should be my utmost vision. Not to gain anything, not for reward or favor, to come to serve. Now, when you're coming to serve, you have to be reminded yourself always, Anuradhi, that I am not the absolute holder of this power. That power is held by the citizen. I am only a temporary custodian of it, and I am of service to the people. I'm answerable to the people, and if you keep that in mind, then all these shows will go off, the security shows will go off, the cameras will go off, and that's what you need to get.
Exactly. Stripped back, it is a service that you are being compensated.
You're coming to serve. Exactly. You're not coming for stardom. You're not coming for stardom. So, very quickly, I hate to draw parallels, but when you have your face on stamps being printed when you go for a ceremony, that is against what you have proclaimed. You have proclaimed that you want to take away political stardom, no? So then you don't get people to even permit people to print your face on stamps and show it off on the TV. That is against the principle of service. If you come to serve, serve. Serve. For goodness sake, serve. And I'm also inviting all parliamentarians who are going into parliament this time. For goodness sake, there is no show. You're not a showman. You're not a star. You go and serve.
Exactly. That's the most important message as well. It's a service. It's something that you do as a duty that you are compensated for, and it is a responsibility.
Just normal compensation, no?
Exactly.
Business class travel, hotel accommodation, to all that.
Yep, that's the unfortunate reality that we'll have to combat probably.
That's okay if they're serving.
I think that lies into my next question, which is about the integrity of this entire process as well. How do we expect the integrity to be maintained when it comes to the election, the process leading up to it as well? What can we expect from the relevant entities?
Anuradhi, people, including me, will go before the people, before an election, say how good I am, how full of integrity I am. I am untouchable. I don't have this, I don't have that. It's up to the people. I have been keeping on saying this for the last almost 2.5 decades. I keep accounting the people, holding the people accountable for sending some of the riffraff that they have sent into parliament. People are responsible. I know that there are economic circumstances that govern it. But hopefully after the Aragalaya, that has ceased somewhat, because the takarang sheets, the roofing sheets, the televisions, the bicycles that used to buy votes have hopefully now gone out. People had mentally made a change. But I'm afraid that that's only the middle class or the upper middle class that have done that, and not perhaps a lower strata of society. So we need to educate our people still. that your franchise should be given to those with integrity. Look at their record. Don't hear what they say or the nice advertisements, as you said, with music in the background, running over hills, running around trees and all that. But look at the man's background. What has this person in their area done? Have they at least done a job of work in their lives? For example, I'm asking your viewers to ask this question. If this person were to lose his parliamentary seat tomorrow, can he feed his family and live? I'm going to ask that question. If the fellow can't afford to earn a decent living from any job other than being a habitual politician or a professional politician, then obviously he is not fit to hold office.
That is the most reflective way that anyone that is going out to vote this time can actually understand, to look at it reflectively and to understand exactly, strip back past the layers, who this person that we're putting our trust in is, in order to ensure that we are adequately represented and our views are reflected in the most powerful institution of the country. So I think since we're nearing the end of this discussion, it's important for us to go into, since we were a little bit retrospective in the beginning, let's look into the future a little bit. When it comes to the future of Sri Lanka and also elections in general and also parliamentary elections, how do we expect it to shape and change moving forward? Will we be seeing construction or will we be seeing any sort of moves in reverse? What are your thoughts?
That's entirely up to your generation, Derana. I know that at this last presidential election, the youth, majority of the youth spoke and they spoke quite clearly. See, the world you're going into, say in 2075, I know former President Vikramasinghe spoke of 2048, I'm going a bit beyond that. When we are no more and your generation have become the senior lawyers and senior professionals in this country, that generation is going to face a brand new world. What we saw as kids growing up on TV, Star Wars and Star Trek and all that, where people are talking onto a phone, that was magic to us. Because it was just magic. It was on TV. But now you're doing it. Your generation actually talking on video to someone. So similarly, when you get to where we are today, you are going to face a different world. And that world is not going to be what it is now. We have to gear ourselves to that. Our parliament has to be geared to that. The so-called professionals also remember, just because, as I said earlier, just because you're a professional also doesn't make you clean. So you have to be very clear, does this man have a vision for beyond his own survival? Or man or woman? Let's hope there's some more female representation this time also. Do they have a vision not just for their livelihood, but do they actually look at children? I have two young kids, the daughter is 22, Kazan is 17. Your generation, when you go up, when you get to a position of seniors, what world will you leave for your future? And how do we now start fermenting that future for you? That is what this parliament needs to look at. And I really, really sincerely hope that Sri Lankan citizens will look at that when they're electing a parliamentarian, not what they're going to do within their 5 years or 10 years. What are they going to do to leave this country a little bit better than they found it for our future generations?
Exactly. I think, unfortunately, that is one of our final points, and it's a great point for us to conclude this discussion on. So thank you very much for explaining to our audience and enlightening them exactly how this process will go ahead in the next few weeks and what we can expect, and also what is expected of us as citizens of this country when it comes to making an informed decision. Thank you very much once again, sir, for taking the time.
Thank you, Anurad. Thank you and your channel for inviting me, and I look forward to seeing you again.
All right, well, the Parliament is a democratic nation's very bedrock, as it is solely the choice of the country's populace on how to best represent ourselves. So it is essential that we make an informed decision in the days ahead. We leave you tonight with the words of US President John Adams. Liberty cannot be persevered without a general knowledge among the people who have a right and a desire to know. That is all we have for you tonight on Law, Land and Liberty. If you had missed any of today's programs, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube page, youtube.com/OtherThanEnglish. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night.